So let's bring in former Secretary of State and Fox News contributor Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, good to have you. Anthony Blinken has the job that you used to have. This is what he said over the weekend about Russian attacks.
Very credible reports of deliberate attacks on civilians, which would constitute a war crime. We've seen very credible reports about the use of certain weapons. What we're doing right now is making sure that as people and the appropriate organizations and institutions investigate whether war crimes have been or are being committed.
So what's the next step out of that, Mr. Secretary?
Well, thanks for having me on today, Bill. Thanks for letting me be on the show, too. There's almost no doubt that videos are showing things that would account for true criminal activity, war criminal activity, not only from those who are actually conducting the strikes, but Russian leadership, those that ordered the strikes and those that permitted them, including all the way up to and including Vladimir Putin. So that's one thing that's bad. It's horrific to watch what's happening to these families, but in the end, this is about a Russian policy that's consistent with their training and doctrine, which is if you aren't successful in your blitzkrieg, if you aren't successful with decapitation, then the next thing to do is to destroy the population's will to continue the fight. And that's clearly the mode that they are now in. They've stalled out in their efforts. And so now what you're seeing is not just attacks on individual civilians, but efforts to undermine the will of the Ukrainian people continue to fight. The United States needs to do everything it can, along with its European partners, to maintain the support that we have so that the Ukrainians continue to defend their country. And then we need to make sure we are prepared when the moment is right to hold accountable those that have done this.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, we're learning a lot about what Putin wanted all along, and what he cared deeply about was Ukraine. I don't know if that was really transmitted in the U.S. media the way perhaps it should have been in hindsight. That to the side now. We signed a security arrangement with Ukraine on the 10th of November. And that arrangement said, we recognize your desire someday to pursue membership of NATO. Why then would we sign that security arrangement knowing full well in these meetings what Putin is talking about with regard to Ukraine? Why would we then not supply in great numbers on behalf of NATO and the United States the javelins and the stingers? Or we don't sign it and we still give them the javelins and the stingers that they needed. You know, in hindsight, was that a massive blunder on behalf of the United States and its NATO partners?
Bill, it's absolutely the case. We've known for months that this attack was pending. We watched the troop buildups. Indeed, senior American officials kept reminding the world that this was about to take place, and all the while we weren't doing all that we could to help the Ukrainians prepare for their own defense, whether it's particular weapon systems, javelin laws, all the tools for their own self-defense. We were very, very slow. Remember, the Obama administration refused to do this. We about a year and a half, 2 years into our time, began the buildup. But this administration had a bias against that, thinking that to deliver those weapons would actually escalate the conflict, when in fact it was the very possibility of creating the deterrence that might well have prevented Putin from thinking he could run through the country.
There's also another thing that's happening right as we speak, and I've been dying to ask you about this, and that is the Biden administration has been trying to work with the Iranians and others in Vienna, and others meaning Russia, on the reconstituting the Iran nuclear deal. Here's the Wall Street Journal editorial board, the Iran-Russia nuclear nexus. The U.S. and Europe are trying to stop Russia's bloody conquest of Ukraine, but at the same time, they are relying on Russia to help revive the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. No wonder Russia feels emboldened to call for even more capitulation from the West. There's a lot going on in the world. All of this is happening. In the meantime, they're still at the table with Russia in Vienna.
You know, I'm in Singapore talking to you today, talking to the Southeast Asian countries about their concerns about whether America will be here to provide the things that they need so they can defend their own countries too. When they watch us sitting at the table with the Russians while the Russians are killing women and children on bridges in Irpin, Ukraine, they shake their heads. It is completely nutty to think that we would either allow the Russians to participate in negotiating a deal with the Iranians, or that in the end we would lift the terror designations on the very Iranians that are trying to kill people all across the world. This is a foreign policy that is largely incomprehensible to not only the American people, but to folks here in Asia as well. We ought to go back to first principles, Dana. These central ideas that we've held as our deterrence model under Reagan and under President Trump, which were effective, same way we were when I was in this very hotel, President Trump meeting at the summit in June of 18 with Chairman Kim. They understood that America was serious. We were going to defend the things that mattered to us most, and we were going to be clear about our objectives and, frankly, clear about the limits of our power as well. But the things that mattered to us, we were going to defend with enormous vigor.
Yeah, in light of that, I mean, to Dana's point about this Iran thing, just on its face, it really makes Americans wonder what's behind door number 3. And who knows what's happening in Vienna with regard to this. But back to the question about security for Ukraine. I mean, you were the Secretary of State under Donald Trump. How much support did you honestly give the Ukrainian government when you had the chance?
Well, I had 2 opportunities in 2 different roles, Bill. The first one, when I was a CI director, I traveled to the Donbass to make sure that our intelligence community was sharing everything that we possibly could with the Ukrainians so they could defend that part of their country before this conflict broke out. And so we developed an intricate, deep set of intelligence relationships. That's a very important part so that we can make sure they have the info they need to defend themselves. And then we began, albeit not until I was Secretary of State, to deliver real deal important equipment to the Ukrainians. If you look back, you think maybe we could have done more, but we did an awful lot more than any administration ever had. And it was the kind of equipment that not only was useful, but that they could train on readily. It's important not to give them things they can't use, but we gave them the kinds of things that you're seeing them now deploy, and we gave them the training to know how to use it as well.
Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Thank you. From Singapore, Mike Pompeo. Let's speak later in the week and see where we are then. Thank you, sir.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.